You ever notice how people love to pretend everything's fine? They smile, scroll, laugh, act like they're in control. But deep down, they're losing a battle they don't even realize they're fighting. See, nobody wakes up and decides to destroy their future. It doesn't happen with one big mistake. No, it's quieter than that, slower, more apathetic. It's the alarm you snooze, the promise you break, the excuse you whisper to yourself when no one's listening. That's how it starts. Weak discipline. Not loud, not dramatic. Just small choices, repeated every single day, until one morning you wake up and realize everything you could have been slipped right through your fingers. Funny thing is, people blame luck. They blame circumstances. They blame the world. But the truth, the real enemy has been staring back at them in the mirror this whole time. So go ahead, keep telling yourself you'll start tomorrow. Because tomorrow, that's where broken futures are born. Weak discipline doesn't arrive like a storm. It slips in quietly through the smallest decisions you barely notice. It's not the big failures that define the direction of your life, but the tiny moments where you choose ease over effort, comfort over growth, and distraction over purpose. You tell yourself it doesn't matter. Just 5 more minutes, just one missed task, just a small delay. But those, just this once, choices don't stay isolated. They stack layer by layer, slowly building a pattern that begins to control you instead of the other way around. Every day, you're casting votes for the person you're becoming. When you ignore your responsibilities, you're not just avoiding one task. You're reinforcing a version of yourself that hesitates, that escapes, that settles. And the dangerous part is how normal it starts to feel. Skipping effort becomes routine. Avoiding discomfort becomes your default setting. You don't even question it anymore because it blends into your identity so seamlessly. The mind is clever like that. It will always find a way to justify the easier path. It whispers things that sound harmless, even reasonable. You're tired. You deserve a break. You'll do it later. And in the moment, those thoughts feel true. They feel earned. But what you don't see is the cost being collected in silence. Every time you listen to those whispers, you're training your brain to associate relief with avoidance. You're teaching yourself that escape is more rewarding than discipline. And over time, something shifts. The things that once required effort now feel impossible. Your focus weakens. Your consistency disappears. Your confidence starts to crack. Not because you're incapable, but because you've proven to yourself repeatedly that you won't follow through. It's not a lack of ability. It's a lack of trust in yourself. And that's where weak discipline does its real damage. It doesn't just slow you down, it changes how you see yourself. You begin to hesitate before even starting. Doubt creeps in not loudly, but persistently. What's the point? You won't stick with it anyway. And those thoughts don't come from nowhere. They're built on the evidence of your own past actions. Every small choice you made to avoid effort becomes proof against you. Proof that you quit. Proof that you delay. Proof that you don't finish what you start. What makes it even more dangerous is that from the outside, nothing looks wrong. You're still functioning, still moving, still telling yourself you have time. But inside, the gap between who you are and who you could be is growing wider every day. And that gap isn't created by dramatic failures. It's built quietly through those small, seemingly insignificant decisions. Consistency works both ways. Just as small disciplined actions can build strength, small and disciplined actions can build weakness. And once that weakness becomes a habit, it begins to shape your environment, your opportunities, and your future. You start missing chances not because they weren't there, but because you weren't prepared to take them. You start settling for less, not because you wanted to, but because you conditioned yourself to accept it. The truth is, discipline isn't tested in the big moments. It's tested in the ordinary ones, the ones no one sees, the ones that feel too small to matter. That's where the real battle is fought. That's where your future is quietly being decided, one choice at a time. Comfort doesn't look dangerous at first. It feels safe, familiar, even deserved. After all, who wouldn't want ease over struggle, relaxation over pressure, certainty over risk? That's how it pulls you in, not as an enemy, but as a reward, something you think you've earned. Something you believe you need. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to organize your life around avoiding discomfort at all costs. You start choosing what feels good instead of what moves you forward. You delay difficult tasks because they're too much right now. You stick to routines that don't challenge you because they're predictable. You avoid situations where you might fail because failure stings. And piece by piece, your world becomes smaller, more controlled, more comfortable, and far less powerful. The problem is, growth doesn't live in comfort. It never has. Every skill, every breakthrough, every version of yourself that's stronger than the last was built in moments that felt uncomfortable. Moments where you had to push, to stretch, to endure something you didn't want to face. When you remove that discomfort, you remove the very force that creates change. What you're left with is stagnation disguised as stability. Comfort trains your mind in subtle ways. It teaches you that ease is the goal, not progress. That struggle is something to avoid, not something to learn from. Over time, your tolerance for discomfort shrinks. Things that once felt manageable begin to feel overwhelming. Challenges you could have handled before now seem intimidating. Not because they've changed, but because you have. There's a quiet trade happening every time you choose comfort over growth. You're exchanging short-term relief for long-term limitation. In the moment, it feels harmless. You relax, you escape, you postpone. But those moments don't disappear. They accumulate. And what they build isn't rest, it's resistance to effort. A resistance that makes it harder and harder to take action when it actually matters. You begin to lose your edge. Your discipline weakens, your focus drifts, your ambition dulls. Not all at once, but gradually, like a slow fade you barely notice until it's too late. You still have your goals, your ideas, your vision, but the drive to act on them starts slipping away. And the more comfortable you become, the more distant those goals feel. What makes comfort so deceptive is how justified it always seems. There's always a reason to choose it. You're tired. You've worked enough. You need balance. And while those things can be true, they're often used as shields to protect habits that are holding you back. The line between necessary rest and harmful comfort becomes blurred, and if you're not careful, you start crossing it without even realizing. Eventually, comfort stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a need. You rely on it. You expect it. And when something disrupts it, when a challenge appears, when effort is required, you resist, you hesitate, you look for a way out. That's when the real cost reveals itself. Not in what you've lost, but in what you're no longer willing to do. The world doesn't reward comfort. It rewards those who can operate despite discomfort, who can move forward even when it's inconvenient, uncertain, or difficult. When you build your life around comfort, you're training yourself for a reality that doesn't exist. And when the real world demands more from you, you're left unprepared. All the potential you have doesn't disappear. It just sits there unused, buried under layers of ease and avoidance. You start settling for less than what you're capable of, not because you lack ability, but because you've built a mindset that prioritizes feeling good over becoming better. And that shift, subtle as it is, changes everything about the direction your life takes. Excuses don't announce themselves as weakness. They show up dressed as logic, as self-care, as perfectly reasonable explanations for why something didn't get done. They sound convincing, almost comforting, because they protect you from the discomfort of responsibility. Instead of confronting what you avoided, you explain it away. And in that moment, it feels like you've solved something. But all you've really done is delay the truth. It starts small. You miss a task and tell yourself you were too tired. You delay a goal and say the timing wasn't right. You avoid effort and convince yourself you'll perform better later. Each excuse feels harmless on its own, almost justified. But what you don't notice is how quickly they begin to stack, creating a pattern that slowly rewires how you respond to pressure, effort, and accountability. The mind prefers comfort over confrontation. Admitting that you didn't follow through requires honesty, and honesty can be uncomfortable. It forces you to see the gap between what you said you'd do and what you actually did. Excuses close that gap artificially. They give you a story that makes failure easier to accept without requiring change. And the more you rely on those stories, the less likely you are to challenge them. Over time, excuses become automatic. You don't even realize you're making them. Something goes wrong, and your brain instantly produces a reason that shifts the blame away from your choices. It becomes a reflex, a shield. And the dangerous part is how believable it all sounds. You start trusting those explanations, repeating them, building your identity around them. That's where the real damage begins. Because once excuses shape your identity, they start controlling your behavior. You stop pushing yourself because you expect a way out. You hesitate before committing because you know you'll justify quitting. You lower your standards, not consciously, but gradually, because deep down you've accepted that you won't always follow through. What makes excuses so destructive isn't just that they prevent action. It's that they erode self-trust. Every time you tell yourself you'll do something and then explain why you didn't, you weaken the agreement you have with yourself. And when that agreement loses strength, so does your confidence. Not the loud, external kind, but the quiet belief that you can rely on your own word. You begin to doubt your own intentions. You set goals, but part of you already expects to fall short. You make plans, but you leave space for escape. And that internal conflict drains your energy before you even begin. It's not the task that feels heavy. It's the lack of certainty that you'll actually complete it. Excuses also distort your perception of progress. Instead of measuring your growth through consistent action, you start measuring it through intentions and explanations. You focus on what you meant to do, what you planned to do, what you could have done under better circumstances. And in doing so, you lose sight of what actually matters, what you did. There's a subtle comfort in believing that your situation is the reason you're stuck. It removes pressure. It gives you permission to wait, to delay, to stay where you are. But that comfort comes at a cost. Because as long as the reason is external, the solution feels out of your control. You stay in the same place, not because you can't move, but because you've convinced yourself the conditions aren't right. The truth is, excuses don't just keep you still. They slowly push you backward. While you're explaining why you didn't act, time keeps moving. Opportunities pass. Momentum fades. And the version of yourself you could have built through consistent effort becomes more distant with every delay. Eventually, the gap between who you are and who you said you'd become becomes harder to ignore. And when that moment comes, excuses won't protect you anymore. They won't rebuild the time you lost or restore the discipline you avoided. They'll just sit there as reminders of the choices you softened instead of facing directly. Self-control doesn't feel powerful in the moment. It feels restrictive, uncomfortable, sometimes even frustrating. It's the voice that tells you to stop when everything in you wants to continue, to begin when you feel like delaying, to stay consistent when your motivation disappears. It doesn't come with applause or recognition. Most of the time, it's quiet, almost invisible. But despite how it feels, it's one of the strongest forces shaping the direction of your life. Every decision you make is influenced by your ability to control your impulses. Not the big, dramatic decisions you think about for days, but the small, immediate ones that happen without much thought. Whether you give in to distraction or stay focused. Whether you act on emotion or pause and think. Whether you choose what's easy or what's necessary. These moments seem insignificant, but they are constantly steering you toward a certain outcome. Without self-control, your actions become reactive. You move based on how you feel in the moment rather than what actually matters in the long run. If something is uncomfortable, you avoid it. If something feels good, you chase it. And while that might seem natural, it creates a pattern where your emotions dictate your behavior. The problem is, emotions are temporary and often unreliable. They shift, they fluctuate, and they don't always align with your goals. When you lack control over those impulses, consistency becomes nearly impossible. You might have clear intentions, strong goals, even a solid plan, but without the ability to follow through regardless of how you feel, none of it holds. You start things with energy, but you don't sustain them. You make promises, but you break them. Not because you don't care, but because in the moment, something else feels more important. That's where direction begins to drift. Not in a sudden, obvious way, but gradually. One distraction leads to another. One delay turns into a habit. One moment of giving in becomes a pattern of surrender. And over time, those patterns shape the path you're on. You may still believe you're heading toward your goals, but your actions are quietly pulling you somewhere else. Self-control acts as a filter between intention and action. It allows you to pause, to evaluate, to choose deliberately instead of reacting automatically. Without that filter, everything becomes immediate. There's no space to think, no space to resist, no space to align your behavior with your long-term vision. You become vulnerable to every urge, every distraction, every moment of weakness. What makes this even more challenging is that self-control is often tested when you're at your lowest, when you're tired, stressed, overwhelmed, or discouraged. That's when the easier option feels most appealing. That's when discipline feels hardest to maintain. And yet, those are the moments that define your direction the most. Because anyone can stay focused when it's easy. The real difference shows when it's not. As your self-control weakens, so does your ability to stay on course. You start making decisions that contradict your goals. You drift toward habits that feel good in the short term, but cost you in the long term. You lose alignment between what you want and what you do. And that misalignment creates frustration, confusion, and a growing sense that you're not living up to your potential. Over time, this affects how you see yourself. You begin to question your discipline, your commitment, your ability to stay consistent. Each time you give in, it reinforces a version of you that lacks control. And that belief becomes harder to break than the habits themselves. Because once you start seeing yourself as someone who can't resist, who can't follow through, who can't stay focused, every future decision is influenced by that identity. Your direction isn't determined by what you say you want. It's determined by what you consistently choose, especially in moments where it would be easier not to. And those choices are governed by your level of self-control. Not occasionally, not in bursts, but continuously, in ways you rarely stop to notice. Discipline doesn't announce its impact right away. It doesn't give you immediate rewards or dramatic results that prove it's working. Most of the time, it feels repetitive, almost pointless, like you're putting in effort without seeing anything in return. You show up, you do the work, you stay consistent, and nothing seems to change. That's the part most people misunderstand. Because what discipline is really doing isn't visible on the surface. It's building something deeper, something that takes time to reveal itself. Each disciplined action is like a quiet investment. It doesn't transform you instantly, but it accumulates. One day of effort won't define you, just like one day of laziness won't destroy you. But when those days start to repeat, they begin to shape your identity. You're not just completing tasks, you're reinforcing a version of yourself. A version that follows through, that stays consistent, that doesn't depend on motivation to act. The future you're moving toward is being constructed through these repeated actions. Not through what you plan to do or what you intend to become, but through what you actually do over and over again. Discipline turns intentions into patterns and patterns into identity. And once something becomes part of your identity, it no longer feels forced. It becomes natural. But reaching that point requires time, and that's where most people fall off. Because in the beginning, discipline feels like resistance. You're going against habits you've built, against comfort you've grown used to, against impulses that feel automatic. It's uncomfortable, and it demands consistency without offering immediate proof that it's worth it. That delay between effort and result creates doubt. You start questioning whether it's working, whether it matters, whether you should keep going. And this is where the long-term impact of discipline is decided. Not in the outcome, but in your willingness to continue despite not seeing one yet. Because the truth is, discipline compounds. The effects are subtle at first, almost invisible, but over time they begin to stack in ways that are impossible to ignore. Your focus sharpens. Your habits stabilize. Your confidence grows, not because of what you've achieved, but because of what you've proven to yourself through consistency. At the same time, the absence of discipline compounds in the opposite direction. When you skip effort, delay action, or rely on motivation alone, you're also building a pattern of inconsistency, hesitation, and avoidance. And just like discipline, those patterns shape your identity over time. The difference is one builds you up slowly, while the other quietly pulls you away from what you could have become. There's a gap between who you are today and who you could be in the future. That gap isn't closed by sudden breakthroughs or bursts of motivation. It's closed by daily actions that seem too small to matter in the moment. Choosing to show up when you don't feel like it. Finishing what you start. Doing what needs to be done, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. These choices don't feel significant individually, but together, they create momentum. And momentum changes everything. It makes consistency easier. It reduces resistance. It turns effort into routine. What once felt difficult becomes manageable, then normal, then automatic. That's when discipline stops feeling like something you force and starts feeling like something you are. The version of yourself you become isn't decided in a single moment. It's shaped gradually through repeated choices that either align with your goals or pull you away from them. And while those choices may not seem important today, they are quietly defining your direction, your habits, and your identity. What you do now, especially when no one is watching and nothing feels urgent, is setting the foundation for everything that comes next.